Hi everyone, I am Dr. Nitin Chavda. I am a pediatric acute and critical care specialist in Hyderabad. Today, our topic of discussion will be fluid vascular access and challenges in trauma patient. Yeah. So to start, in pediatrics, most important aspect for pediatric patients in trauma is their size. Most of the time, the children are handled by adult emergency physicians and orthopedician, and pediatricians are called only in the later half when the management has been started. The biggest challenge is the adult the practitioners are not very sure about how to deal with the pediatric patient because they are unique. And the literature available on trauma care has entirely been focused on adults. All the studies are being extrapolated on pediatric after being studied thoroughly in adult. So when we talk about pediatric challenges, most important is the vascular access. The vascular access in pediatric has unique challenges. First, child is not cooperative. Second, they are scared. There is a psychological trauma associated. Third, their veins are very small and they have more subcutaneous fat. Most important thing is you should be spending 1 minute at least on all the sites whichever are uh, available. For example, dorsum of hand, near wrist, or near saphenous, EJVs. After trying by a competent person, then only we we should label it as a difficult cannula. We should not let our nurses take care of smaller children who are in need of vascular access, and we should not just rely on the nurses to put the cannula. We should spend some time on it because they don't seem to be more expert than what you are in your practices. Children have higher likelihood of hypovolemia because the corresponding losses in trauma can range up to loss of blood of approximately 30 to 50%, where we see moderate, when we start seeing changes of compensated to hypotensive shock. It has been shown in studies that lower success rate by first responders or this paramedical people with more chances of consequent hematomas and bruises in the trauma patient has been noticed. So even the reports of fractures in the extremity bone has been reported when the cannula has been tried in the field by the ambulance workers. I'm not against them using it, doing it, but we need to make sure that they have a better possibility, they have a better training to put IV cannulas. Now, hypothermia causing peripheral vasoconstriction, peripheral vasoconstriction is one of the more important aspect, which is less reported, but is more practically seen whosoever has ever managed a trauma patient. Because of blood loss as well as because of overexposed pediatric patient, their veins are less susceptible for a perfect venipuncture, and we have to take care of the temperature aspect before we go ahead. Traditionally, weight-based dosing has been recommended, and when we are dealing in a situation where weight cannot be measured, then we should rather going in blind, we should follow a length-based resuscitation tape. Internationally, one tape by the name of Broslo tape is recommended in emergencies. If you see on the screen, it has markings in different colors: red for infant, purple for toddler, yellow for small child, with weight under it. And then there are all the necessary equipments which need to be seen there, like resus bag, uh, temperature maintain, and other things. Just give me a second. So yeah, now coming to the topic of fluid management, why fluid is important in these patients is to prevent the the shock, basically to prevent progression of shock, compensated to hypotensive. And what is shock? We all know that. Our goal in fluid management is to provide adequate oxygen delivery to the vital organs. What is the basic step that we can do to resuscitate? Try to put into age appropriate IV cannulas. And why two? Because most of the time they are we have two sides being occupied by the healthcare practitioners, and we can utilize both the sides without any interference on either way to to give them the necessary medications. The shock is being characterized as elsewhere into three: compensated shock, hypotensive shock, and cardiopulmonary failure. Whenever we are dealing, we should be ready to identify shock in first go. Most important aspect in any child of trauma going into shock is can be picked by assessing the heart rate. If a child who had a road traffic accident and is now having heart rate without any obvious bleeding and his heart rate is above his physiological rate, you should consider internal bleedings. If the child is listless, if the child is having a poor sensorium and is having bradycardia, you should consider it going into cardiopulmonary failure. If the pulses are not well felt, low volume peripheral pulses with reasonably okay central pulses, then the shock is progressing. If central pulses are also not felt, then we are dealing with moderate hemorrhage. Around 30 to more than 30 to 35% blood loss has happened. Blood pressure, sometime it needs accurate measurement by a valid device, right cuff. So when you are looking at a patient, managing them, and you want to get what is right and what is wrong, blood pressure gives you an insight on how well the perfusion is and how well is the cerebral perfusion pressure. Uh, we cannot comment on cerebral perfusion pressure without invasive BP, but at the same time, systolic, diastolic BP will give you pulse pressure and mean arterial pressure. Respiratory rate: if a child is losing blood at a rapid rate, then there will be tachypnea, which you will be noticing. And while the child is going into cardiopulmonary failure, this progression of tachypnea will convert into bradypnea if interventions are not done. Mental status: going from irritability to agitation to obtundation is the scale from where we go from minor, from 30% bleed to 30 to 45% to more than 50% blood volume loss. Color: it, it turns from pink to dusky to blue. And temperature, as we have spoken, hypothermia and loss of blood leads to cold peripheries, lead to derangement of capillary refill time. So if you see, each and every parameter is in close coordination with other. One get affected, the other will be felt. If you miss on one, you can always pick on the other one. So try to be vigilant, and important thing is none of these parameters need gadgets or monitors to identify except blood pressure. And all of this can be understood, can be examined by a clinician. As per PAS 2011 and ATLS 2008, hemorrhage in shock in trauma has been categorized into three categories. Less than 30% blood volume as mild hemorrhagic compensated shock, 30 to 45% is moderate hemorrhagic compensated shock, and severe hemorrhagic cardiopulmonary failure, more than 45% blood volume loss. Cardiovascular tachycardia, weak pulses, strong central pulses, then mild acidosis and mild hemorrhage with mild tachypnea, irritability, cool peripheries, and capillary refill more than 2 seconds. If we see the end organ perfusion here, urine output will be slightly less. You can miss here. What I usually ask in my practices is, when was the last urine passed? In the case of trauma, was urine passed at all? Have you seen blood at at the urethral meatus? Are one of our most important question in case of a trauma. In moderate hemorrhage with decompensated shock, or now it is known as hypotensive shock, 40 to 40, 30 to 45% blood volume loss has already happened, and there is moderate tachycardia. Weak pulses, central pulses are weak, weak peripheral pulses, acidosis is moderate. Tachypnea is moderate, child is agitated or lethargic, extremities are cool, pallor is there, capillary refill is more than 3 seconds. There is marked oliguria and increased BUN. Severe hemorrhagic, severe hemorrhage, cardiopulmonary failure is more than 45% of blood volume loss. Tachycardia is severe, pulses are weak, there is no central pulse and no peripheral pulse and weak central pulse. Hypotension, as per PALS, also we have learned that formula is 70 plus age into 2 and the systolic BP is less than this. For age of 2 years, if BP is less than 70 plus 2 into 2, 4, that is if systolic BP is less than 74, you should consider this as a hemorrhagic cardiopulmonary failure and hypotension has set in. There you will get severe acidosis and tachypnea will be too much on the higher side of the normal physiological above physiological range. Child will be obtunded because of hypoxia, extremities will be cool and peripheral perfusion will be poor, capillary refill time will be more than 5 seconds and anuria will be there, that means kidney perfusion has gone down. As per ATLS, first you have to start with crystalloid resuscitation. 20 ml per kg of crystalloid, ringer lactate or normal saline. You can repeat for up to 2 times. Now, if the volume status is restored, you evaluate further. If transfer is necessary, you for observation or operate, you decide as per the situation. The volume status is abnormal. At this moment, after 2 boluses, as per ATLS, you need to transfuse with 10 ml per kg of PRBC. Now, if after transfusion the hemodynamics becomes stable and child person is normal, the child need further observation or need to transfer to a higher setup or need operation need to be decided as per the condition. But even after first PRBC transfusion of 10 ml per kg, things have not improved, then you should make your OR ready because something is not right and this child need to go under the scalpel. We need to do some special consideration and in resuscitation of infant and toddlers and smaller children less than 20 kgs. One thing which we should remember is the most efficient pump to deliver your fluids is 10 cc of syringe and not the traditional electronic pump and tubing machine, because when you give through infusion pumps, at times there are cases which shows that blood has been infused too fast, and this rapid transfusion in a smaller kid has shown pulmonary edema or hyperkalemia. We should not give glucose if sugar is normal, is the sugar is in the normal range. We should keep glucose out of resuscitative fluid, and we should always check regular glucose so that we keep sugar under control, as hyperglycemia is associated with increased risk of infection and thus increased length of stay and increased morbidity. At the same time, hypoglycemia increases chances of mortality. So, regular GRBS evaluation is important aspect while you're taking care of a patient, smaller patient with trauma. There is no strong evidence which justify the use of more expensive non-blood product colloids such as albumin or starch as compared to crystalloid solution available. In traumatic brain injury patient, it has been shown that the use of albumin has been associated with worse outcome. As a pediatrician, all of us, while we do our residency, we go with this formula of Aldesigar, where we have to transfuse patient up to 10 kg with 4 cc per kg per hour of fluid. Above 10 to 20 kg, we add 2 cc, that is 40 cc per hour plus 2 cc per kg per hour for every kg above 10. And patients above 20 kg, 60 cc plus 1 cc per kg per hour for every kg above 20. This slide is specifically for those participants who are not pediatrician by practice and are adult physician or orthopedicians. Blood transfusion. The use of blood products should be strongly considered as a primary resuscitative fluid until hemorrhage can be controlled in patient non-responsive to crystalloid, like I have told in the ATLS algorithm. After two boluses of 20 ml per kg, if there is no sign of improvement in vascular status, you should start with blood transfusion at a rate of 10 ml per kg. What is the right blood? Right blood should be recently collected, should be irradiated freshly, and should be CMV and other infective viruses safe. Emergency usage for matched O negative blood can also be considered till appropriate unit can be delivered, and we should not delay the transfusion if that is paramount. Massive transfusion, this is one aspect which needs a lot of understanding, and one of the most important aspect of this talk. Massive blood transfusion is the transfusion of blood component equaling one or more blood volume within a 24 hours time frame, or half of the blood volume in 12 hours. This definition is primarily for adult, and when we talk about pediatric, then age is one of the most important aspects. So in infant, if we have to give more than 80 ml per kg of blood, or in mature neonates we give more than 90 ml per kg of blood, then we should consider as to initiate massive blood transfusion protocol. In trauma, there is high chance of coagulopathy, and the lethal triad of coagulopathy in trauma is because of hypothermia, hemodilution, and acidosis. They all affect coagulopathy, lead push physiological boundaries, and increase chances of bleeding more. In hypothermia in trauma is the result of shock, exposure, and large volume of resuscitation using room temperature fluid, which decreases platelet activation and adhesion. Now, hemodilution has been seen because of infusion of crystalloid solution or PRBC unit without sufficient co-infusion of FFP and platelets. It dilutes the clotting factors and also worsens hypothermia. The massive hemorrhagic transfusion practices reveal that ideally these are practices being set down as a guideline in your practicing hospital, but on a global scale with protocols from WHO and PCAN, if the injury and the ongoing hemorrhage is increasing, and we have patient who is ranging from stable to tachycardia to hemodynamic instability, we start transfusing blood after we fail after we fail to see that there is no improvement after 20 to 40 ml per kg of crystalloid. When we transfuse as per the weight and age of as per the age of the child, when we are choosing first blood component is PRBC. After we have transfused the PRBC up to 30 ml per kg, we consider one blood volume lost as age appropriate. We go for MBT transfusion protocol with PRBC of 30 ml mixed with FFP of 20 ml. After two blood volume is lost, the ratio will be PRBC FFP platelets, and cryoprecipitate at a volume of 4 ml per kg may be administered after administration of all these three components, or if fibrinogen level falls below 1 to 1.5 gram per liter. After two blood volume lost, or after supporting with this, now after each blood volume lost beyond this, we are going to follow our unit protocol of 30, 20, 20 and 4. If you have already utilized all the above uh, PRBC, FFP and platelet in this format and still bleeding is not is persisting, then you should consider recombinant factor 7A at a dose of 90 microgram per kg. But we should understand that in pediatric, usage of recombinant factor 7A is still under studies and need to be taken with a pinch of salt if you're choosing to start. Complications of rapid under resuscitation in trauma patients. If the child is under resuscitated, there are high chances of multi-organ dysfunction, with the kidneys and liver being the most susceptible organ due to poor perfusion. And when we over resuscitate them, we will be taking care of, we have to take care of pulmonary and peripheral edema, especially in children who have pre-existing cardiac or renal diseases. There are certain complications which are also associated with the procedure. You can have extravasation at the site of cannula. You can have infection at the site of central line because of central line insertion in trauma patient, and otherwise also complication of pneumothorax is also seen. In rare circumstances, even people have perforated the heart while they were trying to put in IJV, and the length of line and length of guide wire has not been taken care of properly and has perforated the heart. Now, iatrogenic complications, hypothermia, air embolism, transfusion reaction when blood products are used, wrongly subcutaneous infiltration of IV fluids, hypocalcemia and hypothermia along with hyperkalemia if blood products are not sufficiently warmed during transfusion. Going ahead with tetanus in our talk, we all know that tetanus is a serious infection and it can lead to death. Although it is not contagious, but it is all preventable by series of vaccinations. Person who has infection with tetanus post trauma will have any of these symptoms ranging from fever to high BP to muscle spasm to dysphagia to sweating and finally trismus lockjaw. And this can be prevented by promoting vaccinations. One of the most important problem which as pediatricians we face daily in our OPDs and ER, I'll discuss it as with an example. 5-year-old came to your emergency department with injury to head. You examine, there is no vomiting, sensorium is good, everything is fine. You see the wound. It's a 2 centimeter by 3 mm deep wound above eyelid, and they ask, do you want to give tetanus vaccine? Now the answer should be with us at all time. We should assess the wound. If it is a clean and a minor wound and patient has primary DPT series vaccination complete with evidence by the parents, or if it is a your follow-up, then this child will not need any kind of vaccination today. The patient should receive next dose at 10-year interval or whenever as per his vaccination schedule time is coming. Now, if this patient has no, no has an incomplete immunization history, at this moment this child should be vaccinated with tetanus toxoid. If the duration, like if we say not 5 year but 18-year-old boy came with the complete immunization, but last immunization with tetanus toxoid at 10 years was not given. This child, although has received the vaccination, but in last past 10 years he has not received any, so this is the time when he should be receiving his next dose. Similarly, if we have a child, or if we have a road traffic accident, pediatric patient coming who has a contamination with dirt, feces, or saliva, or animal bite, or frostbite, or burns, wherever there is a possibility of contamination, we should take robust history. If they don't have any kind of vaccination history available, we should give them vaccine along with tetanus immunoglobulin. If vaccination history is recent and within past 5 years, you don't need to give vaccine. But if the vaccination history is more than 5 years, then we have to administer vaccine here. But no, tetanus immunoglobulin if vaccine has been there in the body. To make it simple, in the form of a table, guide to tetanus prophylaxis in wound management, I will only focus on this. Less than 3 doses or uncertain. Clean minor wounds, yes, we have to give vaccine. All other wounds, vaccine and tetanus immunoglobulin. Recommended dose of tetanus immunoglobulin is 250 IU to be given by IM injection. If more than 24 hours have elapsed, 500 international units should be given. For children, it should be given slowly with a 23 gauge needle due to its viscosity. We should remember that patients with HIV should be given tetanus immunoglobulin if they have received a tetanus prone injury, regardless of time since their last dose of tetanus containing vaccine. Nowadays, with increasing mucormycosis cases and evolving immunocompromised state in some patients post COVID, there are high chances that we will be seeing further studies in this aspect with such patient having trauma, and we will be reviewing a couple of literature to comment whether TIG should be recommended in such population also. Antibiotics in trauma. So the prophylactic antibiotic usage in pediatric is also rampant, but in trauma, it is weakly supported by research. Drug-resistant infections attributable to antibiotic overusage is far more virulent, and we should always remember that antibiotics cannot overcome poor wound management. So wound management is the primary goal for any clinician taking care of pediatric trauma patients. How do we classify fractures and wounds? Grade 1 wound is less than 1 centimeter long and clean. Grade 2 wound is more than 1 centimeter without extensive soft tissue damage, flaps or avulsion. Grade 3 is either an open segmental fracture, open fracture with extensive soft tissue damage, or traumatic amputation. Bacterial contamination can lead to cellulitis, osteomyelitis, and bony reunion. So, always make sure that when you are handling such cases, take all necessary precaution that you don't put in hospital iatrogenic infections in such cases. Such children are best managed by debridement of devitalized tissue with concomitant antibiotic therapy. Infection rate for grade 3 open fracture is 24%. Open fractures, if it is only grade 1 open fracture, recommended antibiotic is cefazolin. If grade 2 or grade 3, until wound is closed, cefazolin and gentamicin. This is the basic antibiotic framework which should be followed. When we talk about grade 3, prophylactic antibiotic should be given as soon as possible after injury for coverage of gram-positive organisms. Grade 3 fractures, add coverage for gram-negative. High-dose penicillin should be added if we have concern for fecal or clostridial contamination in a RTA with child being exposed to feces. When should we discontinue these antibiotics? So 24 hours after wound closure for grade 1 and grade 2 fractures. For grade 3 wounds, it should be continued for only 72 hours after the time of injury or not more than 24 hours after soft tissue coverage of wound is achieved, whichever comes first. Chest tube placement. 1 to 2% incidence of empyema has been reported when chest tube placement has been done, and it has not been done with best of care as context to infection prevention. Single dose of prophylactic antibiotic at the time of placement may reduce risk of empyema if child is not already uh, on any antibiotic, which is like very unusual in our scenarios. When we talk about skull-based fractures, there is no evidence to support routine prophylactic or empirical antibiotics in cases without meningitis, irrespective of CSF. For vascular injuries, single dose, first generation cephalosporin for 24 hours of synthetic graft is being used. For penetrating abdominal trauma, single preoperative dose of cefazolin or MP and sulbactam is sufficient. It should be given as soon as technically possible. In absence of peritonitis, no further antibiotics are indicated and should be discontinued within 24 hours. Remember this, that for trauma care, it starts with good preparation. Like I mentioned, You should see your patient, assess the type of wounds, look at the type of injuries, check out for right and good veins. Assess them with heart rate, BP, pulses, respiratory rate, sensorium, urine output. Reassess after you have intervened. Fluids, you should reassess. After giving any kind of intervention, re-evaluate. Communicate with your team and anticipate complication and plan accordingly. Inform your orthopedic surgeon about need of intervention, and that can only be done if you communicate with them. And throughout this acute phase of traumatic injury, keep on monitoring these children. It is very important. In a nutshell, this underlying picture says ABCDEF, airway breathing circulation disability, exposure, fluids. Continue monitoring of vital signs. Give proper analgesia, do not forget it. If needed, secure the airway, intubate the child with adequate sedation and analgesia. Antibiotic and tetanus as appropriate. Target a urine output of 1 ml per kg per hour. In case of head injury, do frequent neuro assessments. If C-spine clearance is not C-spine clearance is not your role in major trauma, should keep you should keep the C-spine collar in place and should always assess in detail before you say that spine is clear. These were the references, and in case you have some questions, I'll take them now. Also, you can email me on this email ID. Yeah. Okay. So, do we have any questions? Okay. I hope I was clear. It is one half of a bigger topic. I will be putting couple of topics on the group. Can you okay, I have one question. Can you please tell the implications of bleeding per urethra once again, sir? Okay. So in a case when abdominal bleeding is there, we do not want to miss pelvic bleeders. When you have urethral injury, most commonly in straddle injuries, like when children are falling in pits, they fall like this. So genitals are affected, perineum is involved, urethral injury is present, and if you see blood at urinary meatus, do not try to put catheter. No urinary catheterization if you see blood at meatus. Okay. Question from Prabhat. Tetanus and TIG dose. Tetanus is the usual dose of 0.5 ml need to be given IM, and tetanus immunoglobulin is 250 international unit. And if 24 hours have passed and you have high suspicion that this wound is dirty, vaccination is overdue for more than 5 years, there is fecal contamination or contamination is there, 500 international unit to be given. In HIV patients, mandatorily you have to give them tetanus immunoglobulin along with tetanus toxoid. Yeah. So I would like to know, and you can put it on the group. So how many of you will be interested in a talk on how to identify a sick child? Because that goes in collaboration with this topic. But as most of you are already either clinicians or are PG students, uh, it's an important topic, but probably I'll send it across to you. I have a third question now. Can we rule out C-spine injury by CT neck? Definitely, you can rule out C-spine injury by CT neck, but before that, you can rule out by simple evaluation of power. You should always understand the mode of injury Today I will be sending you videos how to do C-spine stabilization and how to do jaw thrust in a case of trauma victim, and not we should not be giving them chin lift at tilt. They should the airway should be made patent by doing jaw thrust. And jaw thrust is a technique which you have to do on a mannequin to learn how to do it. For Dr. Muthu, for your question, yes, you can rule out C-spine injury by CT neck, but if you do a meticulous examination and if child is able to move all four limbs and there is no weakness or loss of power in any of the limbs, then there won't be a problem. Yes. Dr. Jibu has also told the role of clinical decision rules for CT head and C-spine. So if the power in the limbs is not is fine, you have ruled out any obvious trauma in the spine. There is no hemorrhage or any kind of limb pain or any kind of flank pain, no associated severe neurological disability in the patient at the time of examination. At this moment, you should consider this child to have normal spine. If weakness in limb is there, or there is pain at the site or on the spinal on or anywhere on the spine while you are doing a log roll, if you have done a log roll with cervical collar, then, and if you see that the passage of urine or stool is uncontrolled, then you should not remove the collar and you should not give C-spine clearance. In your videos which have been sent to you on ECMS Lecturio application, there is one entire section on PCAN. The PCAN rule for deciding when to actually do CT in trauma is a very important rule, when to involve radiological bigger guns. You should not give direct recommendation for CT scans, because at the end of the day, radiation exposure is too much and we have to weigh when to do, why to do, and when not to do. As a good clinician, you should always be able to tell when you should not do that test, because doing is very easy. Not to do is a difficult part. Any other question? Role of FAST in pediatric trauma, definitely. Focus assessment by sonography in trauma is very important aspect and is readily useful now, and that is the reason ultrasound is part of this trauma course, and you should be able to pick fast findings. If you have not done ultrasound ever, then you should start using the probe. Uh, Videos will the lecture by Dr. Sandeep will not be shared because of certain restrictions by the speaker, but there are good number of videos available on internet where you will be able to understand where to put the probe. And in next session, I will be asking Dr. Sandeep specifically to have a direct one on discussion with all of you, so that those who don't know how to put the probe will understand how to put the probe. What I will recommend is you start using that probe in your institute and try to assess normal patients. If you see 50 normal patients, in one patient who will be having some fluid anywhere, wherever you're looking at, in pleural cavity, around heart, or around in pouch of Douglas or in Morrison pouch, you will be able to get it. Now, we were talking about blood at urethral meatus. Bladder is distended and you have blood in meatus. That's a direct evidence that urethra is damaged. Dr. Muthu is asking role of prophylactic antibiotics in blunt trauma abdomen. if the patient is having blunt abdominal trauma and you see liver laceration, liver renal laceration, and you see evidence of peritonitis, yes. If you have to intervene to close the leak, you have to go, yes. You have to operate under antibiotic coverage, yes. Right antibiotic should cover gram negative, should cover anaerobic, and should also have gram positive coverage. uh, Once you have ruled out all kind of injuries and blunt abdominal trauma patient is hemodynamically stable, then after 48 hours to 24 to 48 hours you should apply antibiotic stewardship policy, start coming down on your prescribed antibiotics. And actually that should be the rule in any kind of illness. When you have a patient who has responded to your intervention and you wish to consider stopping antibiotics, but because of lack of trust on your setup that if I decrease the antibiotic infection आ जाएगा, in that circumstance make use of antibiotic stewardship policies. Step down on antibiotics. Do not take out your bigger guns just like that. Meropenem, piperacillin tazobactam, they are bigger guns. Should restrict them. If not needed, don't use them. If needed, don't stop. Yes. Anything else? Fine. So we will be closing the session now, and it was wonderful to have all of you together. Thank you. I have one more question to ask. Do we consider prophylactic antibiotic for ICD like pneumothorax? Yes. One shot of antibiotic helped in if at all we are not able to maintain. Ideally, we should not be relaxed even 1% when we are dealing with infection policies. But it is recommended that if at all you are putting in a ICD and antibiotic coverage is not robust, you should give one dose of antibiotic during your giving before you put in an ICD in trauma patients. So with this, we'll be closing. Thank you.